The scent of burning rubber filled my nostrils as I lay on the cold asphalt, my mouth tasting of copper. Suddenly, I found myself face to face with Jesus. His eyes held a mixture of love and sorrow as he showed me visions that still haunt me today. My name is Sophia Ellis, and this near-death experience in May 2022 changed everything. For 8 minutes, I glimpsed the devastating consequences of turning away from Christ. What I learned in those moments could transform your perspective on life and eternity. As I share my story, you'll discover why our spiritual choices carry more weight than you could ever imagine. I never thought a routine drive to work would alter my life forever. It was a typical spring morning in May 2022, and I was running late for a meeting. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the city streets as I navigated through the early morning traffic. My mind was racing with anxiety, a jumble of deadlines and expectations weighing heavily on me. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach, the tension in my shoulders as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, barely registering the world around me. As I approached the intersection near downtown, time seemed to slow down. The light had just turned green, and I accelerated, eager to make up for lost time. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. A car was barreling towards the intersection, showing no signs of slowing down. My heart raced as I realized what was about to happen. The sound of screeching tires and crunching metal filled the air. The impact was so sudden and violent that it felt like an explosion. My car spun wildly, and I lost all sense of direction. In those frantic seconds, I saw flashes of my life. My husband's smile, my daughter's laugh, my parents' embrace. Then, another jarring impact as a second car collided with mine head-on. Everything went black for a moment, and then I felt a strange sensation. It was as if my consciousness was gently separating from my physical form. I experienced a tingling warmth spreading throughout my body, followed by a feeling of lightness. Suddenly, I was floating above the scene, watching paramedics work on me. It was surreal, like watching a movie of myself. I should have been terrified, but an overwhelming sense of peace washed over me. I watched as the emergency responders cut through the mangled metal of my car, their faces tense with concentration. I saw my own body, limp and bloody, being carefully extracted from the wreckage. It was a bizarre experience, feeling completely detached from the chaos below. In the distance, I saw a warm, inviting light. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen before. It was alive, pulsing with energy and love. It beckoned to me, and I felt an irresistible urge to move towards it. As I drew closer, my perception began to shift dramatically. The physical world faded away, replaced by a realm of pure energy and consciousness. Colors I had never seen before danced at the edges of my vision, and I felt a sense of expansion, as if my very being was growing beyond its previous limits. As I approached the light, I felt a presence I can only describe as divine. It was vast and all-encompassing, filled with an unconditional love that brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that I was in the presence of Jesus. His energy enveloped me, and I felt a sense of homecoming, as if I had been away for a very long time and was finally returning to where I truly belonged. As the weight of those visions threatened to crush my spirit, everything suddenly shifted. The pain and regret faded away, replaced by a presence so powerful it took my breath away. I found myself enveloped in a light so pure it defied description. It was as if I had stepped into a realm beyond time and space, where earthly concerns held no meaning. As my eyes adjusted to the brilliance, I saw a figure standing before me. The light seemed to emanate from him, radiating love and authority. Jesus stood there, his eyes a deep, warm brown that held infinite compassion. His features were both familiar and otherworldly, a perfect blend of humanity and divinity. His expression was serious, almost grave, and it made my heart race with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He spoke, and his voice was both gentle and firm, resonating through my entire being. "Sophia," he said, "there is something you must understand." I wanted to fall at his feet, to worship, to ask 1,000 questions that had always burned in my heart. But I found myself rooted to the spot, unable to do anything but listen. "I have important truths to reveal to you," Jesus continued. "What I am about to show you will be difficult, but it is necessary. The weight of this knowledge is heavy, but it is a burden you must carry back to the world." I felt a lump form in my throat. Lord, I whispered, I'm afraid, what if I'm not strong enough? Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt a wave of strength and courage flow through me. My strength is sufficient for you, Sophia. I will be with you every step of the way. I will show you the eternal impact of rejecting me, Jesus said, his eyes filled with compassion and sorrow. Every soul has a choice, Sophia, and that choice echoes through eternity in ways few can comprehend. With those words, the world around us began to shift and change. The pure light that had surrounded us started to swirl and coalesce into shapes and forms. It was as if reality itself was being reshaped by his will, forming into vivid scenes that played out before my eyes. I watched as a young man walked out of a church, shaking his head. I could somehow sense his thoughts, his struggle with doubt, his decision to turn away from faith. As he walked, his steps seemed to leave invisible ripples in the air, spreading outward like waves on a pond. Those ripples touched others, his future wife, who never heard about God's love from him, their children, who grew up without any spiritual foundation, friends and coworkers who missed out on the light he could have shared. Jesus spoke softly. Each decision to turn away from me creates a void, Sophia, a void that the enemy is all too eager to fill. The scene shifted, and I saw Sarah, an old college friend who had once been passionate about her faith. I watched as she gradually drifted away, choosing career advancement over her relationship with God. Her life seemed successful on the surface, but I could see the growing emptiness in her heart. This is why I have brought you here, Jesus said, his voice filled with urgency, to understand the true weight of rejection and the pressing need for my children to embrace my love before it's too late. As Jesus' words hung heavy in the air, the scene before us changed. We were suddenly in a crowded church, the air thick with expectation. My eyes were drawn to a man in his early 30s, sitting alone in the middle of a pew, intently focused on the pastor. As I watched him, I saw flashes of his life, a successful businessman working long hours, struggling with a failing marriage, and neglecting his young daughter. The pastor's voice rose and fell, speaking about salvation and God's love. As the sermon reached its crescendo, he invited those wanting to accept Christ to come forward. The man's grip on the pew tightened, his internal struggle visible. I could feel the war within him, the desire for meaning warring with doubt and fear. My heart ached as I saw the conflict on his face. I wanted to encourage him, but I was merely an observer. Minutes ticked by as people moved towards the altar. The man remained seated, his breathing shallow. I saw the moment his decision was made. His shoulders slumped, and he released his grip on the pew with a shaky breath. As the service ended, he quickly left, his steps hurried. I felt a profound sadness watching him go, seeing invisible walls going up around his heart. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow. In this moment, his heart begins to harden, he explained. I understood the significance of this pivotal moment in his spiritual journey. Reflecting on this vision, I thought of my own life and similar crossroads I'd faced. How often had I let fear or doubt hold me back from fully embracing God's love? What happens now? I asked softly. Jesus showed me flashes of the man's future, opportunities for spiritual growth passing him by, his heart growing colder. This is why every moment of decision is crucial, Jesus said compassionately. It's about the trajectory of a soul. But remember, as long as there is breath, there is hope. My grace is always available, even to the hardest hearts. I nodded, understanding the importance of responding to God's call and the subtle ways our hearts can harden if we repeatedly turn away from his love. As Jesus' words hung in the air, the scene around us began to shift once more. This time, it felt different, more intense, more urgent. I sensed that what I was about to witness would shake me to my core. The man we had been observing suddenly appeared before us again, but this time his life seemed to be unfolding like pages in a book, flipping rapidly. I watched transfixed as each decision he made took him further from God. His face hardened, the light in his eyes dimming with each passing year. I saw him immerse himself in work, chasing success and recognition. As his bank account grew, so did the emptiness inside him. Look closely, Sophia, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow. See how his rejection of me affects not just him, but those around him. I watched as the man's relationships crumbled. Arguments with his wife intensified. His children withdrew. Family dinners became silent affairs. In one heartbreaking scene, his daughter, eyes brimming with tears, asked him to come to her school play. "I'm too busy," he snapped, not even looking up from his phone. As the years rolled by, I saw the man's influence spread. His cynicism about faith affected his coworkers and friends. Even his parents began to question their beliefs. His children, without a spiritual foundation, searched for meaning in all the wrong places. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with infinite love and sadness. "There is always hope, Sophia, but each decision to turn away makes the journey back that much harder." I felt overwhelmed by the far-reaching consequences of one man's choice. It was like watching a stone thrown into a pond, the ripples expanding outward, touching everything in their path. "Every decision carries weight," Jesus said, his voice filled with compassion, "far beyond what we can see. Our choices are like seeds. Some grow into thorny weeds that choke out life, while others bloom into beautiful gardens that nourish many." I saw the man in his 50s, sitting alone in his office late at night. Awards adorned the walls, but his eyes were empty. He picked up a photo of his family from years ago. For a moment, I saw regret cross his face, but he set it down and turned back to his computer, burying himself in work once more. The visions continued, showing his influence spreading further. A young intern, inspired by the man's success, adopted his cutthroat practices and dismissive attitude towards faith. This intern became a powerful executive, perpetuating the cycle. I witnessed missed opportunities for reconciliation. A chance encounter with an old church friend, ignored. A coworker's invitation to a Bible study, declined with a scoff. Each moment was a crossroads, a chance to turn back towards the light, but each time the man chose to continue down his lonely path. "Sophia," Jesus said gently, "remember that every moment is a crossroads. The smallest choice can set in motion a chain of events that changes lives for generations to come." I felt a deep sense of awe at the interconnectedness of our spiritual journeys. It wasn't just about individual salvation anymore. It was about the intricate web of human connections, the way our choices shape not only our lives, but the lives of those around us, creating a legacy that extends far beyond our own lifetimes. The scene shifted once more, and I found myself in a sleek modern office. The walls were adorned with framed certificates and awards, and the large window offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. At the center of it all sat a woman behind an imposing mahogany desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard of her latest model laptop. As I took in the scene, a sense of familiarity washed over me. I recognized her face, though it had been years since I'd last seen it. Sarah Thompson, once a passionate worship leader at our church, now a high-powered executive in a Fortune 500 company. The transformation was startling. Jesus stood beside me, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow as he gazed at Sarah. "Watch," he said softly, and suddenly I was transported through a series of moments from her past. I saw flashes of Sarah's journey, her radiant face as she led worship, her compassionate work with the homeless, and then the gradual shift. I watched as she began skipping church for work, her prayers becoming hurried and distracted until they faded entirely. "When did it happen?" I asked Jesus, my heart heavy with the realization of how far Sarah had strayed. "It wasn't a single moment," Jesus replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "It was 1,000 tiny choices, each one taking her a step further from me." As I looked at Sarah now, I could see the toll her choices had taken. Despite her impeccable appearance and the trappings of success all around her, there was an emptiness in her eyes that no amount of worldly accomplishment could fill. The office hummed with activity, the soft whir of the air conditioning, the muted ringing of phones, the distant ding of an elevator. Sarah's perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically on the keyboard, the sound echoing in the spacious room. Suddenly, Sarah's hand paused over the keyboard. Her gaze drifted to a small cross necklace lying forgotten in her desk drawer. For a moment, I saw a flicker of longing in her eyes. Her fingers hovered, almost touching the delicate chain, as if reaching for a memory of who she once was. Just then, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, reminding her of an upcoming meeting. Sarah's professional mask slipped back into place. She shut the drawer firmly, the cross hidden once more, and turned back to her computer. "But it's not too late, is it?" I asked, hoping against hope that there was still a chance for Sarah to return to her first love. Jesus smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "It's never too late as long as there is breath. My grace is always available, always sufficient. But the longer one walks away, the harder it becomes to turn back. I watched as Sarah stood, smoothing her designer suit and gathering her tablet for the meeting. As she walked towards the door, her reflection caught in the window. For the briefest moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face, a silent battle waging behind her eyes. This scene struck me deeply, making me realize how easily our priorities can shift if we're not vigilant. Sarah's story was a stark reminder of how success, when pursued at the expense of our relationship with God, can leave us feeling more empty than fulfilled. Jesus turned to me, his expression grave. The sorrow in his eyes was palpable, and I felt my heart constrict with a mixture of anticipation and dread. When my children reject me, whether through defiance or neglect, the enemy gains ground, he said, his voice heavy with concern. As his words sank in, I felt a chill run down my spine. I began to understand the spiritual battle at play, a war invisible to our earthly eyes but with consequences that echoed through eternity. Jesus gently took my hand, and suddenly, the world around us seemed to shift and blur. "Watch closely, Sophia," he said softly. "There's more you need to see." Before my eyes, a series of scenes unfolded. I saw people making small, seemingly inconsequential choices that led them away from God. A young mother chose social media over prayer. A teenager slept through church. A businessman prioritized work over volunteering. Jesus explained, "These small compromises are like hairline cracks in a foundation, barely noticeable at first, but they create openings for the enemy to work." I watched as these choices compounded over time. Faith dwindled, hearts grew colder, and ears became less attuned to God's voice. The enemy's influence grew stronger, distorting truth and sowing seeds of unbelief. People who once loved God with fervor became indifferent, their passion replaced by apathy. In one scene, I witnessed a former devoted follower turn bitter and cynical. "God doesn't care," he'd scoff when coworkers mentioned prayer. "If he did, why is there so much suffering?" "The enemy is patient," Jesus said, his voice cutting through my distress. "He doesn't need to convince someone to reject me outright. He simply needs to distract them, to keep them too busy or too comfortable to seek me." I saw this strategy play out in various ways. A woman found solace in wine instead of scripture. A man ignored those in need, preoccupied with his own concerns. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why does he do this?" Jesus' reply was gentle but firm. "The enemy seeks to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came to give life. He knows that every soul that turns from me is a victory for his kingdom of darkness." As I absorbed this, Jesus showed me more. The enemy's influence spread like a contagion. Those who had drifted from faith impacted others around them. Children raised without faith, friends influenced by cynicism, communities slowly losing their spiritual foundations. It was like watching a tapestry unravel, thread by thread. Each individual choice sent ripples through families, communities, and even generations. The darkness seemed to grow, threatening to engulf everything in its path. But just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, Jesus squeezed my hand. "Remember, Sophia," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "As long as there is breath, there is hope. My grace is always available to those who turn back to me." With those words, he showed me glimpses of redemption. The young mother rediscovered her faith and taught her children to pray. The cynical man walked into a church, tears streaming down his face as he felt God's presence wash over him. These visions filled me with a mixture of hope and urgency. I realized the importance of staying connected to God, even in the small moments. Every prayer, every act of obedience, every choice to prioritize our relationship with Him was a victory in this unseen battle. As I absorbed the weight of what Jesus had shown me, He gently squeezed my hand. "There's more," He said, His eyes holding a depth of sorrow I couldn't fathom. "Are you ready to see how a single choice can alter the course of many lives?" I nodded, my heart heavy but determined. Jesus guided me through a series of visions, each revealing a different facet of rejection. What struck me most was how seemingly small decisions compounded over time, creating a chasm between people and their Creator. I watched a young mother named Emily. She used to start her mornings with prayer and scripture reading, but as life got busier, those quiet moments slipped away. It didn't seem like much at first, but I saw how these choices created distance between her and God. As weeks turned into months, Emily's connection to her faith weakened. When faced with challenges, she relied more on her own judgment than seeking God's wisdom. Her coworkers, once drawn to her peace, now saw her as just another stressed-out colleague. Her children began to view faith as something that didn't really make a difference in daily life. I witnessed similar patterns in others' lives. A businessman named Mark started skipping church for work. Soon, Sundays became his most productive workday. When a crisis hit his marriage, he had no spiritual support system to turn to. The vision shifted to Aisha, a college student who decided to take a break from her faith. Her choices influenced her younger siblings, who began to question everything they had been taught about God. I saw communities suffering as believers drifted away. A once vibrant church became a social club, more focused on potlucks than prayer. A Christian school lost its distinctive character as teachers compromised their values bit by bit. What broke my heart was seeing how these choices affected people's ability to hear God's voice. With each step away, their spiritual ears grew duller, their decisions became more self-centered, guided by cultural pressures rather than eternal truths. Overwhelmed by the weight of what I was witnessing, I felt my knees buckle. Jesus steadied me, his touch a reminder of his constant presence. Every choice is a step towards me or away from me, he said. My children often don't realize how these small decisions shape their hearts over time. As I absorbed his words, I began to grasp the importance of our daily spiritual decisions. It wasn't just about avoiding big sins or showing up to church on Sundays. It was about cultivating a constant awareness of God's presence and aligning our will with his in every moment. I saw how a simple act of kindness, done in obedience to God's prompting, could set off a chain reaction of goodness. A woman who chose to forgive her difficult neighbor became a powerful testimony of God's love, leading to reconciliation in her community. These visions filled me with a mixture of awe and urgency. I realized that every interaction, every decision, every thought held eternal significance. We were all connected in ways we couldn't fully comprehend, and our choices had the power to draw others closer to God or push them further away. As I pondered this, Jesus offered a metaphor that helped me understand. Imagine a garden, he said. Each choice is like tending to a plant. Some choices nurture growth, while others allow weeds to take root. My love is the sunlight and rain, always available, but it's up to each person to choose whether to cultivate their garden or let it wither. As Jesus and I continued to witness these scenes, I couldn't help but notice the changes in his demeanor. His eyes, once filled with wisdom and authority, now shimmered with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It was as if the weight of countless souls turning away from him had settled upon his shoulders. But then, something extraordinary happened. We saw a young woman named Rachel, who had closed her Bible years ago, hesitantly picking it up again. As she opened its pages, Jesus' eyes lit up with a joy so intense it took my breath away. "Watch, Sophia," Jesus said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the moment her heart begins to soften." I observed as Rachel's fingers traced the familiar words, her eyes widening with recognition. Jesus leaned in, his gaze never leaving her face. "I've been waiting for this moment," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day, I've called to her." As Rachel's eyes filled with tears, I felt my own heart constrict. The love pouring from Jesus was almost tangible, wrapping around Rachel like a warm embrace. I realized then that what I was witnessing wasn't just divine observation, it was divine celebration. We turned our attention to Tom, the middle-aged man who had once shaken his fist at the sky. Now he knelt beside his bed, his hands clasped in prayer. Jesus' reaction was immediate and powerful. He moved towards Tom, his arms outstretched as if to gather him close. "Even in his anger, I loved him," Jesus said, his voice trembling with joy. "And now he's coming home." I watched in awe as Jesus' face transformed. The sorrow I had seen earlier was replaced by a radiance that seemed to light up the very air around us. With each word of Tom's hesitant prayer, Jesus' smile grew brighter. "Do you see, Sophia?" Jesus asked, turning to me. "This is why every choice matters. It's not about rules or commandments. It's about this moment. The moment a heart turns back to me." As we continued to observe, I saw a teenager who had once walked away from her youth group. Now she was tentatively stepping back into a church, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Jesus' reaction was immediate and tender. "She's afraid," he explained, his voice soft with compassion. "But watch how I welcome her." I saw love pour out from Jesus, enveloping the girl like a warm blanket. As she relaxed, a small smile playing on her lips, I felt tears spring to my eyes. The depth of Jesus' love, his joy at each return, was overwhelming. Witnessing these moments of return affected me profoundly. I thought about my own journey, the times I had drifted away and the gentle way Jesus had always drawn me back. I realized that each return wasn't just a victory for the person coming home. It was a moment of incredible joy for Jesus himself. "This is why I never give up, Sophia," Jesus said, his eyes meeting mine. "This joy, this reunion, it's worth every moment of waiting." As I looked at him, I saw no condemnation for those who had strayed, only an invitation to come closer, to understand more deeply. The ripple effects we had witnessed weren't just about external consequences. They were about the gradual softening of hearts, the slow drift back towards the source of all love and life. In that moment, I began to truly understand the depth of Jesus' love. It wasn't just about forgiveness or second chances. It was about a love so vast, so enduring, that it celebrated every step back home, no matter how small or hesitant. And as I watched Jesus' face light up with each return, I felt my own heart opening wider, ready to love more deeply than I ever had before. Just as I felt overwhelmed by the weight of rejection, Jesus' expression changed. The sorrow in his eyes melted away, replaced by a warmth that radiated hope. "But Sophia," he said, his voice filled with joy, "there is always a way back home." The scenes before us shifted, and I witnessed people who had once turned away from God finding their way back to him. I watched as Michael, a man in his late 30s, walked hesitantly into a small church. His hands trembled as he picked up a Bible, tears streaming down his face as he read. Jesus explained that Michael had walked away from his faith in college, but was now realizing that true fulfillment comes from a relationship with him. The scene shifted to Lisa, a successful woman sitting alone in her high-rise apartment. She reached for her phone and called her old pastor, her voice breaking as she asked for help. Jesus smiled gently, explaining that Lisa had allowed her career to become her idol, but was now taking her first step back to him. I witnessed more stories of return and redemption. A teenager rediscovering faith in a youth group, a couple rekindling their spiritual life together, and entire communities being renewed as people returned to God. In one moving scene, I saw a small town ravaged by addiction begin to heal as recovering addicts reached out to others still trapped in the cycle. "Do you see, Sophia?" Jesus asked, his voice filled with tender love. "My grace is always available for those who turn back. No one is ever too far gone, no heart too hardened that it cannot be softened by my love." His words reminded me of a lighthouse, its beam cutting through the darkest storm, guiding lost ships safely back to harbor. God's grace, I realized, was like that unwavering light, always shining, always ready to lead the way home, no matter how far someone had strayed. "But why?" I asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his love. "Why welcome them back after they've rejected you?" Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with infinite compassion. "Because they are my children, Sophia. A parent's love doesn't end when a child wanders away. If anything, it grows stronger, longing for their return. My love for each soul is greater than any human love could ever be." He showed me more scenes of redemption. A woman finding peace after years of anger at God, a former atheist humbled by a moment of inexplicable grace. Each story shared a common thread, the transformative power of God's endless love and grace. As I witnessed these powerful moments of return, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. The message of God's unfailing love and ever-present grace was too important to keep to myself. I realized that I had a responsibility to share what I had seen, to let others know that no matter how far they had strayed, the path back to God was always open. The joy on Jesus' face as he watched these reunions was indescribable. It was as if each person returning to him was the most precious thing in all of creation. I began to understand that every moment of every day, countless souls are making their way back to him, and each return is celebrated with boundless joy in the heavens. In that moment, surrounded by visions of redemption and renewed faith, I felt my own heart swell with hope and purpose. The message was clear. It's never too late to come home to God's love. As our time together drew to a close, Jesus turned to me with an intensity that made my heart quicken. His eyes, once filled with compassion, now held a sense of urgency. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying a weight that pressed upon my soul, "you must share what you've seen." I felt the enormity of this responsibility settle on my shoulders. It was both an honor and a burden, and I wondered if I was truly up to the task. Jesus, sensing my hesitation, placed his hand on my arm, sending a surge of strength through me. "Every moment is an opportunity to choose me," he continued. As he spoke, I saw flashes of people going about their daily lives, a businessman rushing to work, a teenager scrolling on her phone, a couple arguing over bills. In each scene, I sensed a whisper from God, unnoticed or ignored. Jesus showed me how the enemy works to distract and delay our decisions. I watched a young woman feel a pull towards faith, only to have her attention diverted by a phone notification. I saw a man on the verge of recommitting his life to God, called away by a work email. These were calculated attempts to keep people from making the most important choice of their lives. The enemy knows that keeping you too busy or distracted to choose me can be as dangerous as outright rejection, Jesus explained. He then showed me urgent scenes. A young man who had been considering attending church decided to do it next week instead. The following week, he was in a car accident that left him in a coma. An elderly woman who had been meaning to reconnect with her faith kept putting it off. She passed away in her sleep, never having made that reconnection. Tomorrow is not guaranteed, Jesus reminded me, his voice tinged with sadness. So many believe they have all the time in the world to make their choice, but life is fragile, and every heartbeat is a gift. I understood then that the time to embrace God is always now. Jesus showed me life as a burning candle, its flame at risk of being extinguished by the slightest breeze. Each moment we delay is like watching the wax melt away, never to be recovered. I saw more visions, people who had chosen to embrace him without delay. A drug addict who, in desperation, cried out to God and found strength to seek help. A bitter divorcee who forgave her ex-husband and found unexpected peace. In each case, the decision to turn to God had profound effects on everyone around them. "My grace is always available," Jesus said, "but it must be accepted. It's like a gift, freely given, but only yours when you choose to receive it." As our time ended, Jesus looked at me with love and hope. "Tell them about my love, my grace, and the importance of choosing me today," he said. "Remind them that I am always waiting, always hoping, always loving. But also tell them that the choice is theirs, and the time is now." The weight of this mission pressed upon me, and I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. How could I possibly convey the urgency of what I had witnessed? Yet as I looked into Jesus' eyes, I knew that with his strength, I could share this crucial message with the world. I gasped for air as my eyes flew open, the hospital room coming into focus. The harsh fluorescent lights stung my eyes, and the steady beeping of machines filled my ears. My family's worried faces swam into view, their eyes red-rimmed from crying. The doctor rushed to my bedside, his face a mixture of shock and amazement. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "you were clinically dead for 8 minutes. We thought we'd lost you." 8 minutes. It felt like a lifetime and a mere second all at once. In those 8 minutes, I had traveled beyond the veil of death and witnessed things that would forever change me. The visions Jesus had shown me remained vivid in my mind, each scene etched into my memory with crystal clarity. As I recovered, I found myself viewing the world through new eyes. The bustling hospital corridors seemed charged with hidden meaning. Each person I saw, doctors, nurses, patients, visitors, I couldn't help but wonder about their spiritual journey. Were they drawing closer to God or drifting away? Did they understand the eternal consequences of their daily choices? The day I was discharged, I stood at the hospital entrance, looking out at the busy street. The world seemed both familiar and utterly changed. Cars zoomed by, their engines a low rumble. People hurried along the sidewalks, all unaware of the invisible battle being waged for their souls. I took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of the task before me. "Are you ready to go home?" David asked, wheeling my suitcase up beside me. I turned to him, a newfound determination in my eyes. "I'm ready to start living, David. really living. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into research, reading everything I could find about near-death experiences, spiritual awakening, and the nature of faith. I reached out to support groups for people who had similar experiences, seeking to understand how they had integrated their experiences into their lives. I started small, sharing my story with friends and family. Some were skeptical, others were deeply moved. But with each retelling, I felt more confident in my purpose. I began to see the ripple effects of my words. A cousin who decided to return to church, a neighbor who asked me to pray with her for the first time in years. As my strength returned, I felt called to expand my reach. I started a blog, sharing not just my experience but also the lessons I had learned about the importance of daily spiritual choices. I spoke at local community centers and churches, my voice growing stronger with each testimony. But it wasn't always easy. There were nights when I lay awake, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I had seen and the responsibility I felt. How could I possibly reach everyone who needed to hear this message? How could I convey the urgency I felt in my soul? In those moments of doubt, I would close my eyes and remember the love and authority that radiated from Jesus during our encounter. I would recall his words about the importance of every soul, every choice. And I would find the strength to keep going, knowing that my near-death experience wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the start of a new life mission. As I reflect on my experience, I'm overwhelmed by the profound lessons Jesus showed me. Our lives are intricate tapestries, each decision a thread woven into a masterpiece that extends far beyond ourselves. I've seen how kindness can spark a chain reaction of goodness, while selfishness can cast long shadows, affecting generations. This glimpse into eternity has given me spiritual clarity, revealing the true weight of our choices. I urge you to consider your own spiritual journey. How will your tapestry unfold? What legacy will you weave? Remember, every moment matters. Your actions ripple through time, shaping not just your story, but the stories of countless others.